Hello and welcome to My Book, a podcast show about books and their authors, produced by Cine Ink, based in London. I am Malvika Kaul from New Delhi, and I will discuss with you a unique book I have read on Kashmir. Kashmir is often described as a paradise on earth. It is also called one of the most dangerous places on earth. What is it like to live in a place like Kashmir? What has its people gone through in the last 7 decades? How has Kashmiri language expressed the sentiments of its people?
My earliest memories are the best memories of my life. Kashmir seemed to be the most perfect place in the world. I mean, having been born here and living here, we may not have been so much aware of its spectacular beauty because we took it for granted, but we were aware of the fact that we were rather special because we celebrated diversity. In those days, there was no difference between Hindu or Muslim, Kashmiri Muslim or Kashmiri Pandit. As far as dress was concerned, the women dressed in salwar kameez, whether they were Muslim women or Kashmiri Pandit women. But the formal dresses might have been different, but there was such kind of a bonhomie, such kind of closeness, which is unimaginable today. The friendships that were forged then have lasted, but I feel so sorry for the younger generation which hasn't seen those good times at all.
Professor Neerja Mattoo, an academic, writer, translator based in Srinagar, Kashmir, felt the need to convey the aspirations and frustrations of the people of Kashmir. She decided to translate in English some of the best stories written in Kashmiri language. This painstaking effort has led to the birth of a wonderful book, The Greatest Kashmiri Stories Ever Told. This book is published by Aleph Book Company in New Delhi. The book has 25 short stories and engages in themes like loss of homeland, corruption of the state, the exodus of Kashmiri Pandits, and the desires and disappointments of Kashmiri women. I am pleased to have Professor Neerja Mattoo joining us from Srinagar, the summer capital of Kashmir. Professor Neerja Mattoo, this book has 25 stories covering 70 years. How did you think about this book? What was your aim?
Thank you very much for inviting me. Actually, there wasn't a set aim kind of thing. I have been fascinated by my own language, which is my mother tongue, Kashmiri. And I've always wanted people to know about its existence and about the literature it is so rich in. And my experience was that most people were not even aware of the fact that Kashmiri is a language. And was the first provocation. And the second was what started happening in the late 80s and the beginning of the 90s. I thought that Kashmir was hurtling towards disaster, destruction, and something had to be salvaged. So, because you see, the college work was also not really going on normally. So I had plenty of time on my hands. So I thought that why don't I tell these stories to the rest of the world? And in fact, the first collection I titled it The Stranger Beside Me, because I thought there was so much misunderstanding about Kashmir. The people in India, the rest of India should know what these people think, what they feel, and how they are normal human beings, should not be demonized. So that was the main reason that I started translating these stories.
Did you have a criteria how you will identify, because the collection must be vast?
Actually, you see, teaching in a college, I was always, interested in what was happening in the field of literature in other languages, and particularly Kashmiri. And then Kashmiri poetry was very much a part of our bringing up, because these were songs that were sung at all occasions. And these were actually songs written by women poets as well as men poets. But this story thing started in Kashmir very late, in the middle of the last century. Till then, poetry was flourishing, but prose was not much in vogue. And because whatever people wrote, they wrote either in Urdu or Farsi or English. So then I realized that these were stories that had to be told. And I also realized that these were stories which were not only dated in a way, but they had a kind of a, what shall I say, a universal kind of an appeal, because the themes were based in Kashmir, but they were something to which people all over the world could identify. So the desire to tell, and then the criterion I used was to go chronologically, the best writers in different periods of time, from the 1950s to the 2020s. I had to use my resources of tracking down authors and getting permission from them.
That's a remarkable effort indeed, to trace authors, seek their permission, and also to cover such a long period of Kashmir. Your book begins with Reply Paid Card by Dinanath Nadim, a pioneer of Kashmiri short story. What is the significance of this story in Kashmiri literature? It is often quoted.
Actually, the significance, first of all, is that it's the first ever short story written in Kashmiri. There were dastans and other things, but the proper short story, this is the first one. And the significance is also that it is very, very much reflective of the time in which it was written. This was the time in 47, 48, when we had this tribal invasion backed by Pakistani army, which attacked Kashmir and ravaged vast parts of Kashmir, and they were advancing towards Srinagar. But then there was a local militia which armed itself, and there was a women's self-defense corps also, who also underwent weapon training, and they were ready to defend their homeland. And this story encompasses that very, that spirit, because there is this lady in the village who is respected. She's an elderly person. But when it comes to the fact that she gets to know that her son is killed in a battle fighting the tribal invaders, she decides to arm herself and go to the defense of the homeland. You see, is a perfect crystallization of that spirit and that mood and that, the passion to protect the homeland against all invaders. And Dinanath Nadim, unfortunately, didn't write many more stories, but he was a great poet. And most of his work was driven by a social conscience.
Mm-hmm. Indeed, it's a very moving tale. And the economy of words, I noticed, by the author is amazing. Mm-hmm. The Progressive Writers Association had a strong influence on Kashmiri language writers. How did they impact the storytelling form?
Oh, they impacted it deeply. You see, because they were people with a social conscience. They had a mission. Literature was not for just enjoyment, but literature was supposed to transform or create awareness among people about their situation in life and how they could change it for the better. And so this was the spirit which infused the Kashmiri writers at that time. They were all concerned with the fate of the marginalized, the downtrodden, who had been, almost treated like slaves and serfs during the feudal times in Kashmir. So their whole attempt was to galvanize society and to make people take steps to improve their lot. So you can see the story, the next story, there is the Somnath Zutshi story. Again, it has a spirit of hope that the downtrodden feel now that the freedom has come, their lot will improve. They have that hope. So the earlier stories are all reflective of the hope that a better time is going to come. But then later on, they reflect the disappointment when the aspirations are not fulfilled. So you see the changing moods of society and the people influenced by the progressive writers, ideology that continued to have a powerful sway on Kashmiri short story writing till the early 70s.
Yeah, I'm also very impressed with the diversity of stories which are talking about, a lot of them talk about the exploitation of people. And as you've said, during the feudal times, you've lived in Kashmir for a long time yourself, and you've lived through some of the worst phases of militancy. What are your earliest memories of Kashmir, and how has violence changed that?
My earliest memories are the best memories of my life. Kashmir seemed to be the most perfect place in the world. I mean, having been born here and living here, we may not have been so much aware of its spectacular beauty because we took it for granted. But we were aware of the fact that we were rather special because we celebrated diversity. In those days, there was no difference between Hindu or Muslim, Kashmiri Muslim or Kashmiri Pandit. As far as dress was concerned, the women dressed in salwar kameez, whether they were Muslim women or Kashmiri Pandit women. But the formal dresses might have been different, but there was such kind of a bonhomie, such kind of closeness, which is unimaginable today. The friendships that were forged then have lasted, but I feel so sorry for the younger generation which hasn't seen those good times at all. I mean, we didn't have material wealth, but we've had a sense of, satisfaction and the belief that things could only get better. But they didn't happen. And I cannot recognize today's Kashmir if I compare it with the way we grew up. Because you see, the kind of freedom that we enjoyed, there was no restriction. There was hardly any parda among Kashmiri Pandit or Kashmiri Muslim girls. There was no difference, and we were known by our roll numbers rather than names. And our staff members were a diverse mix of people from all over India. We had professors from Lucknow, from Meerut, from Aligarh, from even Calcutta and Punjab. So we were used to living in a kind of a diversity. But today it is different. I don't see the young women today enjoying the same degree of the freedom that we did. And they are restricted by some dress codes and stuff which we were not aware of then. And there is also, you see, unfortunately, a kind of a hesitation in expressing their opinions, which was not there. See, we could argue, we could fight with each other also and have, heated arguments, but there was no bitterness, nothing. But now, unfortunately, the young people are a bit hesitant these days. So I see a lot of difference.
Some people, Neerja ji, talk a lot about Kashmiriyat, the disruption of the concept of Kashmiriyat.
We didn't use the word Kashmiriyat, but what it means or what it is supposed to mean is what we practiced. That is, you see, there was no prejudice, no bias. That was the essence of Kashmiri Pandithood. Kashmiri Pandits never lived in kind of ghettos or away from the Muslims. In every mohalla, you would have couple of 2-3 Kashmiri Pandits also living together. Living togetherness, accepting each other's way of life and not minding. For instance, I'll give you an example. My mother's closest friend was a Muslim lady who lived in the adjacent house. So they were more close than sisters, but my mother didn't eat in their house. And that lady didn't mind it at all. As soon as my mother would come, she would tell her helper, please get some fruit, she won't have tea here. But it was not resented. But today, we may eat the same food, but there is not the same kind of relationship.
You are listening to My Book, a podcast show about books and their authors. I'm Malvika Kaul from New Delhi. Welcome back to my conversation with Professor Neerja Mattoo. We are discussing The Greatest Kashmiri Stories Ever Told, a book published by Aleph Book Company in New Delhi. The book is available on Amazon and other outlets. Neerja ji, sometimes the worst times create the best literature. Do you agree?
Yes, I do. The years of militancy have also given birth to remarkable works in poetry, in short story writing, in plays and music. Because you see, when you feel, when you are afraid, like I did when I started thinking of translating stories, you are afraid that you are going to lose something, then you want to make double your efforts to try and preserve it in some way or the other. So we have seen wonderful poems being written, and the short stories that have been written by people who have suffered the agony of displacement and who have suffered the agony of violence, who have lost their dear ones. They are very powerful stories. You see, I think your contentment doesn't lead to such remarkable flights of imagination and creativity as suffering does. For instance, you have this story of the moss floating on the river by Ratan Shah. It talks about, you see, even though everything is lost, yet the essential relationship is not lost. The desire to reach out to each other, even to a person who is the other, who might be your enemy, whom you might resent. But there is the spirit feeling that everyone has suffered equally. So there is no that kind of resentment here. There is a kind of a balanced view. And I think it's a very mature kind of way of reacting to what has happened to Kashmir.
Yes. But they also joke with each other like earlier times. So that's very wonderful to read about. Neerja ji, I see you as an expert translator, and you have earlier translated another collection of short stories. What are your concerns when you're translating eminent Kashmiri writers?
My first concern is to be totally faithful to the original that is written by these great writers. And also, you see, I must tell you that when I began this work about a couple of decades ago, most of these authors were still alive. Not all of them, but they were. So when I translate, I used to send the draft to them to check with them whether they thought that I had done a good job. And they were most encouraging, and they sometimes used to pay me a compliment that it sounds better in English, what we have written, which was not true. But anyway, that was a compliment to me. I'm totally faithful. I don't want to embellish. I don't think I can write better than what they have done themselves. But only thing I do is I put it in a different language. And lucky thing is that I sort of grew up with these two languages. So one is a mother tongue and the other doesn't sound foreign to me.
Kashmiri language is rarely heard outside Kashmir. Some even claim that Kashmiri language is dying. Does it have a future?
It has a future because now people are tenaciously clinging to it, even though over many past decades, it was completely almost disused even at home because people thought there was no future in knowing Kashmiri. They had to know Urdu and English to get on with the world. But now, you see, when you feel that something is on the verge of being lost, then you cling to it even more strongly. So I see that there are online classes where people are taught Kashmiri, and many younger generations of Kashmiris who have lived outside and have lost the language, they are learning it from those online classes. And here again, you see, fortunately now, after many years, put Kashmiri as a compulsory language to be learned in school up to class 10. But so I don't think it will die. It has such a rich literature, and people, if they relish that literature even in translation, they will be, I think, encouraged to see what the original sounded like. And I'm glad to say that some of them have become very proficient in Kashmiri language, those who are not Kashmiris. But there seem to be institutions online as well as maybe elsewhere where they are doing a good job of teaching Kashmiri to people. Because Kashmiri is not an easy language as far as its accent and some consonants are concerned. They don't exist in Hindi or Urdu. And they used to say that you are born, then only you can pronounce Kashmiri correctly. But that's not true. People make the effort and they speak it quite correctly. And it's a rich language, a long history, more than 800-900 years. Great poetry and very good short stories also.
That's so wonderful, Professor Neerja Mattoo, that there are efforts being made to keep Kashmiri language alive and
Yes.
robust. Most people in Kashmir have this brooding question of identity. What is the Kashmiri identity? How has Kashmiri literature addressed this question?
See, not the Kashmiri literature didn't do it kind of self-consciously, but it did revel in the idea of a particular Kashmiri identity. That we were different in the sense that, first of all, we were removed physically in distance from the rest of the country. We were surrounded by mountains and therefore kind of cocooned also. But then we were also constantly being attacked by marauders and looters and things. So we clung to a kind of a special Kashmiri identity, took pride in the fact that we were not violent people, and we had this kind of tremendous acceptance of differences. And the Kashmiri identity also wanted to retain that identity. They didn't want to lose it. And that is a feeling which is still there. So Kashmiri identity I can't define, but I mean, because we just took it for granted that we are Kashmiris, so we were a different kind of people. We had the desire to learn. We had a sense of humility. We thought we didn't know everything when we were confronted by the modern world. So we had the humility to try and learn and not be aggressive. But then things change.
Yes, things changed and have disturbed people for many years. Another book you authored, The Mystic and the Lyric, 4 women poets from Kashmir. Your book explored the work of 4 classic women poets, Lal Ded, Habba Khatun, Arnimal, Rupa Bhavani. How have women shaped the literary landscape of Kashmir?
Oh, this is my favorite subject. I think that the two dominant, you see, movements of in literature, the mystic and the romantic, were all founded by women. Lal Ded in the 14th century wrote mystic poetry, and that line continues till today. We have these great Sufi Kashmiri poets and things, but they all of them owe their origin to what Lal Ded said. She set up this whole mystic culture within this writing of mystic themes in Kashmiri. And as far as the romantic lyric is concerned, that also is founded by a woman, Habba Khatun, in the 16th century. And the rest of the poets who write in this vein are all, in a way, I can say, followers of what Habba Khatun has said in the beginning. Then Rupa Bhavani followed in the vein of Lal Ded. She's another great mystic poet. And Arnimal followed in the wake of Habba Khatun, wrote beautiful musical, you see, romantic lyrics of love and longing. And 3 of them are Kashmiri Pandit, and one is a Muslim, Habba Khatun. And they were, I can say, rebels in their own way, because they spoke most frankly about the power of the voice of women in most of these different centuries. And the romantic lyricists among them made no secret of the fact that they had this longing for a human lover. And also their poetry, in fact, is, what shall I say, most unself-consciously it talks about the needs, even the sexuality of a woman. Women have been articulate, they have talked about their suffering, they have revolted against the practices of society, and also about the cruelties of women. I think they are examples of proto-feminism. So I think that is the book which I am rather proud of, because I introduced most of them to the English-speaking world for the first time. People had heard of Lal Ded, but Habba Khatun, Bhavani and Arnimal were probably unknown outside Kashmir.
I think that's a great contribution you have made to put women's perspective in literature and to help all of us, the generations to come, understand Kashmir better through diverse perspectives.
This Mystic and the Lyric is a book which is an all women effort. I am a woman, I'm talking about women, and my publisher is a woman, Urvashi Butalia of Zuban. The cover design comes from Nilima Sheikh's painting. Learning comes from one Prabha Devi, who was the last exponent of Kashmir Shaivism here, and Bettina Boehmer, who's also a great Shaivite scholar, great Sanskrit scholar. She's an Austrian lady, but deeply interested in Kashmir Shaivism and other things. So it's a fortuitous thing that all women have contributed in producing this book. I thought I should tell you.
Wonderful. And I, a woman, am interviewing you. Your last story in this collection, The Search, by a woman author, Diba Nazir.
Yes.
She's one of the youngest short story writers in Kashmiri language. Her story speaks of loss, of regret, but it also has an element of hope. Do you think literature can heal the wounds of the past?
I don't know whether it can, but it should. You see, there is a story in this collection which is called The Stranger Beside Me. I mentioned it as the title I used for my first collection. But you see, this is a story where there is this kind of a diktats are coming from the powers that be, and people have to conform. And one diktat that comes is that everyone should have a mole on his cheek. And so the people who don't have a mole on, there are very few people who have. The people who don't have are in a panic, and then they rush to this place and that. And there is this person who wants to help his friend. I will read the excerpt from the book. Just as before, the scorpion stung the same spot on his cheek again and again. The stranger beside me fell unconscious, just as I had when I was stung. Wherever the spot where the scorpion had stung stood a little black spot, exactly like a mole. When he regained his consciousness, he realized that the poison had spread through his veins, suffusing his whole being. But like me, he too was happy because now he also had a mole on his cheek. So he was there, he now had a mole. The poison was well within him. From his appearance, no one could doubt his breed or authenticity afterwards. He went his way and I went mine, but he and I remain similar in one aspect. There is venom in him and there is venom in me. This is the way this story ends.
This is a story by Hriday Kaul Bharti.
Bharti.
Yes.
And now this I will neutralize the poison of the story by the ending of Diba Nazir's story. And in fact, before I do that, you had the request to speak in Kashmiri also. So I will tell you the last sentence of this excerpt I read. Sutidra Panyavati, Vitidras Panyavati, Magar Suti os Kosh, Kivan Hekian Kahtamis Vanit, Kitsuchukna Asal, Tuchukna the China Sani Zat, the Vanos the Misti Zahar, Meti Zahar. This is the Kashmiri.
I'm feeling nostalgic. I used to hear my grandmother. So,
but then after that, your family lost.
This is really beautiful.
Anyway, thank you. So you see, this is how the parting words of this young man. When this neighbor tells him, "Why didn't you come earlier?" He says, "How could I come earlier? We have lost so much. Our very identity is lost. The houses and mansions may be rebuilt, but the loss of our dear and near ones is tough to bear. I do remember my sister. I miss her on every Raksha Bandhan day, whether she remembers me or not. But I do know in my heart that she will remember me, particularly on the day when they deck her hands with henna, I said. My last final words to her were, if you ever happen to see her, please tell her that her brother is searching for her or craving to meet her. So I thought that might neutralize the venom of the first story.
Yes, indeed. Thank you, Neerja ji.
I'm so glad that you called me, and I'm happy to have spoken to you because this is a subject very near to my heart, and I'm happy that people are interested. Thank you very much. Wish you all the best.
Thank you, Professor Neerja Mattoo, for your time and moving insights into the lived experiences of the people of Kashmir. The Greatest Kashmiri Stories Ever Told has been published by Aleph Book Company in New Delhi and is available on Amazon and other outlets. In our next show of podcast My Book, you are going to meet another author along with a book because, as you know, this is a podcast show about books and their authors. This podcast has been produced by Pervaizalam for Cine Ink. To listen to other episodes of my book show, you can visit the Cine Ink website www.cineinkpodcast.com. Cine Ink podcasts are also available on Apple, Spotify, Google Podcast and YouTube. I am Malvika Kaul signing off. Goodbye.